Once upon a time in a busy town in Nigeria, a beautiful baby was born. His mother, Mrs. Okafor, named him Victor. She held him close and smiled, happy to have her first child. But what no one knew was that in the hospital, a terrible mistake happened. Victor was exchanged with another baby, and he went home with the wrong family. Hello everyone, my name is Adugo and you're watching the African Tales channel by Adugo. Before we dive into the story, please kindly click on that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be notified whenever I upload a new video. Now let's get into the story. The Okafors were a poor family, struggling to make ends meet. They lived in a small house and could barely afford food. The baby who went home with them wasn't Victor, but another boy, a child who didn't belong to them. They loved him as their own, unaware of the mistake that had happened. Meanwhile, Victor was growing up in a wealthy family, the Adesanyas. They lived in a big mansion, with everything money could buy. But something was missing. Victor never felt like he belonged. His parents showered him with gifts, yet he always felt a strange emptiness in his heart. He had everything a boy could wish for: expensive toys, trips to different countries, and the best education, but he wasn't happy. As Victor grew older, he noticed something odd. He looked nothing like the Adesanyas. His skin was darker, his eyes sharper, and his face was different. People would often ask, "Are you really Mr. and Mrs. Adesanya's son?" This made him curious and anxious. He started feeling like a stranger in his own home. One day, when Victor was 12 years old, he overheard a conversation between the Adesanyas and a family friend. They were whispering about something strange that happened at the hospital the day Victor was born. The baby was exchanged, they said quietly, hoping Victor wouldn't hear, but he did. His heart pounded in his chest. Could it be true? Was he not their real son? This revelation sent Victor on a journey he never expected. He secretly began searching for answers, trying to find out who his real parents were. He felt betrayed by the Adesanyas, the people he thought were his family. Even though they had treated him well, deep down he wanted to know the truth about where he came from. Victor's search took him to the very hospital where he was born. He talked to old nurses and doctors, hoping someone would remember something. After weeks of searching, he found a nurse who had been there the day he was born. She remembered the strange incident but had no idea what happened to the other baby. Victor's heart raced as he got closer to the truth. But it wasn't easy. His journey was filled with fear, doubt, and many sleepless nights. He started having dreams about a woman he didn't know, a woman with a warm smile and gentle hands. Every time he woke up, he felt a longing in his heart, a deep desire to find her. Then one day, while going through old hospital records, Victor found something shocking. There was a file with his birth details, and beside it was the name of another family, the Okafors. Could they be his real parents? His hands trembled as he held the file. He knew his life was about to change forever. Determined to meet the Okafors, Victor set out to find them. He was nervous, unsure of what he would discover. Would they welcome him with open arms, or would they reject him just like he feared? He didn't know, but he knew he had to try. When Victor arrived at the small house where the Okafors lived, he hesitated for a moment. It was nothing like the grand mansion he grew up in. The house was old and the walls looked like they might crumble any minute. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A woman answered. She was much older than he expected, with tired eyes and worn clothes. But there was something similar about her, something that tugged at Victor's heart. Could this be his real mother? "Hello, my name is Victor," he said, his voice shaky. I think, I think you might be my mother." Mrs. Okafor's eyes widened and tears filled them as she stared at the boy standing before her. She didn't need to ask questions. She knew in her heart that this was her son, the boy she had lost so many years ago. Without saying a word, she reached out and pulled him into a tight embrace. Victor felt something he had never felt before: peace. This woman, with her gentle touch, made him feel whole. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged. But the joy was short-lived. There was another boy, the one who had been living with the Okafors all these years. When he saw Victor, confusion and fear filled his eyes. What would happen to him now? Would he be sent away from the only family he had ever known? Victor too felt conflicted. He had found his true mother, but he had also torn apart another boy's life. He wondered if he had done the right thing by seeking the truth. As Victor's new life with the Okafors began, he struggled to adjust. He missed the luxuries of his old life, the comfortable bed, the fancy food, and the security that money provided. But more than anything, he missed the people who had raised him, the Adesanyas. They may not have been his real parents, but they had loved him in their own way. Now, Victor had to navigate a world filled with complicated emotions. He had found his real mother, but the happiness he had longed for still seemed out of reach. Every day, he faced new challenges, trying to fit into a life that felt both familiar and strange. Victor stood in the small, dimly lit room of the Okafor house, his emotions swelling like a storm inside him. The embrace from Mrs. Okafor had been warm, but now the weight of everything began to settle on his shoulders. He looked around the room, at the peeling walls and the worn-out furniture. This was his real home, where he was supposed to have grown up, but it felt so unfamiliar, so distant from the life he had always known. The boy who had been living with the Okafors, his name was Emeka, stood in the corner watching Victor with wide, anxious eyes. Victor could sense the fear in him. Emeka had grown up in this house, believing the Okafors were his parents. And now, in a single moment, his entire world had been turned upside down. Victor couldn't help but feel guilty. He had come searching for answers, but now it seemed he had only caused more pain. Mrs. Okafor, who had tears streaming down her face, finally let go of Victor and turned to Emeka. "Emeka, my dear," she said softly, her voice trembling. "This is Victor, my son. But you are still my child too. Nothing will change that." Emeka's eyes filled with tears, and he shook his head. "But I am not your real son," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I am nobody's real son." Victor's heart broke at those words. He knew what Emeka was feeling: lost, unwanted, confused. It was the same way Victor had felt for years, growing up in the Adesanya mansion, surrounded by wealth but never feeling like he truly belonged. "I am sorry," Victor said, stepping closer to Emeka. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted to know the truth." Emeka wiped his tears with the back of his hand and nodded. "I know," he said, his voice shaky. "But what happens now?" It was a question that lingered in the air unanswered. What would happen now? Victor had found his real mother, but that didn't erase the years he had spent with the Adesanyas. And Emeka, what would happen to him? Would he stay with the Okafors, even though he wasn't their real son? Or would he be sent back to the Adesanyas, a family he had never known? Mrs. Okafor placed a hand on each boy's shoulder, her face full of love and sadness. "We will figure this out," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "No matter what, we are a family, and families stick together. But as the days passed, things only became more complicated. Victor tried his best to adjust to life with the Okafors, but it wasn't easy. The house was cramped and the food was simple, a far cry from the government meals he had been used to. He missed his old life, the comfort of the mansion, the endless supplies of everything he needed. He missed his bedroom with its large windows and soft bed. And most of all, he missed the Adesanyas, even though he had been angry with them. Victor couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. Yes, he had found his real mother, but he had also lost the life he had always known. Was this trade-off worth it? One evening, as Victor sat outside on the porch, staring at the stars, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Emeka. He sat down next to Victor, not saying a word for a few moments. The air was cool and the sounds of the neighborhood, the chatter of people, the distant hum of traffic filled the silence. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like?" Emeka finally asked, "if we hadn't been switched?" Victor nodded slowly. "All the time," he admitted, "but I don't know if things would have been better." Emeka looked at him, surprised. "How can you say that? You had everything, a big house, rich parents. Why would you want to leave that?" Victor sighed, trying to find the right words. "I had everything, but I didn't feel like I belonged." It's hard to explain. It's like, no matter how much they gave me, I always felt like something was missing. And now that I have found my real family, I thought I would feel better. But he trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. "But you don't," Emeka guessed. Victor nodded. "I don't. Not yet." Emeka was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "I think I understand. I thought I had everything I needed here. I had Mama and Papa. But now I feel I don't know who I am." Victor looked at Emeka, seeing the pain in his eyes. It was strange, but in that moment, he realized they were more alike than different. Both of them had been caught in a terrible mistake, and now they were both searching for where they truly belonged. "We will figure it out," Victor said, repeating his mother's words. "Somehow we will." As the days turned into weeks, Victor began visiting the Adesanyas again, trying to reconnect with the family that had raised him. But every time he walked into their mansion, it felt different. The luxurious surroundings no longer felt like home. Mr. and Mrs. Adesanya tried their best to welcome him back, but there was an awkwardness between them now, a distance that hadn't been there before. Victor found himself torn between two worlds. He had his real mother, Mrs. Okafor, who loved him with all her heart, but living in poverty wasn't easy. And he had the Adesanyas, who had given him a life of luxury, but the connection he once felt with them was fading. Each day, Victor woke up with a heaviness in his heart, unsure of where he truly belonged. Would he ever find peace? Or was he destined to be stuck between two families, two lives, forever? Victor's days turned into a blur of confusion. At the Okafor house, he was surrounded by love, but he couldn't ignore the struggles they faced. Every morning, Mrs. Okafor woke up early to prepare food for the market, working tirelessly to provide for her family. They ate simple meals, mostly rice or beans, and Victor often felt guilty for missing the lavish dinners he once had with the Adesanyas. But it wasn't just about the food or the small house. It was the weight of living two different lives. One filled with love but hardship, the other filled with luxury but emptiness. He missed his soft bed, but he also craved the warmth of his real mother's embrace. It was as if his heart was split into two. Emeka, on the other hand, was still struggling to find his place. He often stayed quiet, watching Victor with a mix of curiosity and jealousy. He couldn't understand why Victor didn't seem happier after finding his real family. Emeka had grown up believing Mrs. Okafor was his mother, but now he felt like an outsider in the only home he had ever known. It wasn't fair, he thought. He hadn't asked for any of this. Sometimes he would go outside at night and stare at the stars, wondering what his real parents were like. Did they miss him? Did they even know he existed? One night, when the house was quiet, the only sound was the creaking of the old wooden walls. Victor found Emeka sitting outside again, looking up at the sky. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" Victor asked softly as he sat down beside him. Emeka didn't answer right away. He kicked a small stone with his foot and then finally spoke. "Do you think they would even want me? I mean, if I showed up at their door, would they look at me like I was a mistake?" Victor felt a pang of guilt. "I don't think you are a mistake, Emeka. And I am sure they wouldn't think so either. You didn't ask for this any more than I did." Emeka sighed. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I don't belong here anymore. Mama tries, but I can see it in her eyes. She's happy you're back, and I know she loves me, but I am not really her son." Victor felt the weight of those words. He had come into this family, searching for his place, but now he wondered if he had disrupted Emeka's world too much. "You will always be her son," Victor said, hoping it would bring some comfort. "She raised you. That means something." Emeka nodded but didn't seem convinced. "Maybe. But what if I go to the Adesanyas? What if they don't want me?" Victor's heart clenched. He hadn't thought much about how difficult this situation was for Emeka. He was right. What if the Adesanyas didn't accept him? They were used to a different life, a life of wealth and privilege. Emeka didn't know that world. How would he fit in? The next morning, Victor decided to visit the Adesanyas again. He had been going back and forth between the two families, trying to figure out where he fit. But today felt different. He wanted to talk to them about Emeka. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make this work for everyone. When he arrived at the mansion, Mrs. Adesanya greeted him with a warm smile, but there was something in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. It was as if she wasn't sure how to act around him now. The distance between them felt more obvious with every visit. "Victor, it's good to see you," she said, guiding him to the sitting room. The grand chandelier sparkled above them, and the furniture gleamed as if no one had ever sat on it. Everything was perfect, too perfect. Victor sat down and took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about Emeka," he began. "He is really struggling. I think he feels like he doesn't belong with the Okafors anymore. But I am worried. If he comes here, will he feel the same way?" Mrs. Adesoya's face softened. She had always cared deeply for Victor, but now that she knew he wasn't truly hers, she wasn't sure how to handle the situation. "Victor," she said gently, "we've thought about Emeka too. It's not easy for any of us. But if Emeka is our son, we will love him just as much as we have loved you. This is not about where someone comes from or how much money they have. It's about family." Victor wanted to believe her, but deep down, he still had doubts. The Adesanyas had raised him in a world of privilege. Could they truly accept Emeka, who had grown up with nothing? As they sat in silence, Mr. Adesanya entered the room, his face serious. "We've been discussing this, Victor," he said, sitting beside his wife. "We want to meet Emeka. He's our son, and we owe it to him to make this right." Victor's heart lifted slightly. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something better for all of them. Later that week, the Adesoyas visited the Okafor home for the first time. The atmosphere was tense, filled with unspoken emotions. Emeka stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of what to expect. He had never seen such wealthy people up close before, and now they were telling him that he was their real son. Mrs. Adesoya walked up to him slowly and smiled, her eyes soft. "Emeka," she said, her voice gentle, "I've been waiting a long time to meet you." Emeka looked down at his feet, not sure what to say. He had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was happening, it felt too big, too overwhelming. Would they really love him like they had loved Victor? Mrs. Adesoya reached out and took Emeka's hand. "You are part of our family, Emeka. We will figure this out together." As the two families sat down to talk, Victor watched from the side, his emotions swelling once again. He had come looking for his real mother and found her, but in the process, he had torn apart another family's life. Now, as the two worlds collided, he wondered if they could ever truly be whole again. The meeting was a step in the right direction, but the road ahead was long and uncertain. Victor still felt like he was walking between two lives, never fully belonging to either one. Would Emeka find his place with the Adesanyas? Would Victor ever feel at home with the Okafors? As they all sat together, Victor realized one thing. Finding the truth was just the beginning. The real challenge was learning how to live with it. The weeks that followed the meeting between the Okafors and the Adesanyas were filled with careful steps, awkward conversations, and slow adjustments. Emeka began visiting the Adesanyas more often, learning about the family he was supposed to have grown up with. But it wasn't easy for him. Their world of luxury felt like a distant dream, one he had never imagined being a part of. At first, Emeka struggled. The huge mansion felt cold and empty, even though it was filled with beautiful things. He missed the warmth of Mrs. Okafor's small house, where the family sat together every night, laughing and telling stories. The Adesanyas tried their best to make him feel welcome, but he still felt out of place. There were so many rules, so many expectations. Meanwhile, Victor continued to live with the Okafors, but he too was struggling. He missed the life he once had, the comfort of knowing that his needs were always met. Every day he woke up to the sound of Mrs. Okafor preparing food to sell at the market, and every night he lay in bed thinking about the Adesanyas and the life he had left behind. One evening, Victor and Emeka found themselves together again, sitting outside the Okafor house, just like they had many times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. For a while, they sat in silence, both boys lost in their thoughts. "I don't know if I'll ever get used to it," Emeka finally said, breaking the quiet. "The Adesoya's house, it doesn't feel like home." Victor nodded. "I know what you mean. I thought finding my real family would make everything better. But sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel like I truly belong anywhere." Emeka looked at him, his expression serious. "Do you regret it? Looking for the truth?" Victor thought about the question for a moment. "No," he said softly. "I needed to know, but it's been harder than I thought. I thought I would be happier, but it's like, no matter where I am, I feel like I am missing something." Emeka nodded slowly, understanding. "Yeah, me too." They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear. Then Emeka spoke again. "I guess we are both trying to figure out where we belong." Victor sighed. "Maybe it's not about where we belong. Maybe it's about who we are, no matter where we are." Emeka looked at him, surprised by the wisdom in his words. "What do you mean?" I mean, we've been so focused on finding the right family, the right home. But maybe it's not that simple. Maybe home isn't just a place or a family. Maybe it's something inside us. We are the same people, no matter where we are. Emeka thought about that for a moment. So, it doesn't matter if we are with the Adesanyas or the Okafors. I think it matters, Victor said. But what matters more is who are we? The love we carry with us, the memories we make. We can belong in both places in different ways. Emeka smiled a little, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe you are right. Over time, both boys began to find their own sense of balance. Emeka spent time with the Adesanyas, learning about his biological family and trying to fit into their world. But he never forgot the Okafors, the family that had raised him. He visited them often, sitting with Mrs. Okafor and helping her at the market, just like he always had. Victor too found his way. He stayed with the Okafors, learning to appreciate the simple joys of life with them. He no longer felt he had to choose between two worlds. Instead, he embraced both families, finding love and acceptance in different ways. Though their journey was far from easy, both boys learned important lessons along the way. They discovered that family is not just about blood, but about love, care, and the bonds we build. They realized that happiness doesn't always come from having the perfect life, but from finding peace within themselves, no matter their circumstances. As time went on, the two families grew closer. The Okafors and the Adesanyas learned to share the love they had for both boys, understanding that they didn't have to lose one to love the other. They became one big extended family, bound not by a perfect past, but by a shared commitment to a better future. In the end, Victor and Emeka found that the journey to discovering who they truly were wasn't just about where they came from. It was about the choices they made, the people they cared for, and the love they gave and received. Moral lessons. 1. Family is not just about blood, but about love and care. Both Victor and Emeka learned that the people who love and raise you, no matter where you came from, can be your family. 2. True happiness comes from within. Victor thought finding his real family would bring him happiness, but he realized that peace comes from accepting who you are, no matter where you are or what you have. 3. We can belong in more than one place. You don't have to choose between different parts of your life or different families. You can find a way to belong in both. 4. Embrace challenges to grow. The journey to understanding who you are is often filled with difficulties, but facing them helps you grow stronger and wiser. The truth may not be easy, but it's important. While discovering the truth about their past was painful, it ultimately helped both boys learn valuable lessons about love, identity, and family. We have come to the end of the story. If you love this video, please kindly share with your loved ones, leave us a comment on your opinion, and subscribe for another interesting video like this. Until I see you all on the next one. Bye for now.